How do you think the pandemic, the working from anywhere, the revolution in terms of work style here in Dubai, I mean, they are literally opening the doors to the tech world, to the programmers. There's a hustle, there's a global hustle to steal that crown, isn't there? How big of a challenge does London and the UK face in a post-pandemic world to be that hub of innovation?
I think the COVID pandemic really underlined how important technology is in all areas of our lives, but particularly when it comes to financial services. And we saw so many fintechs step up and really help SMEs and individuals navigate through the crisis. In the UK, I mentioned earlier, $11.6 billion of investment into our ecosystem in 2021. That's second only behind the United States, and it's actually ahead of the next 6 European countries combined. So we very much stand at the forefront. We also have one of the most proactive regulators here within the UK, and are setting examples that the world over are following within that space as well.
I mean, it's interesting because you do see a lot of these tech companies starting in the UK, but what do we need? What incentives do we need to make sure they stay here, especially when companies mature to reach the IPO phase of their growth?
Yes, we definitely need to see some reform in terms of the listings, and off the back of the strategic review of UK Fintech done by Ron Khalifa, we have seen some progress. So it was wonderful to see the FCA implement some of these key areas, including the dual class shares and also the reduction of the free float minimum as well. But we need to go even further. So looking at our asset investors as well, looking at making sure that we have the tax incentives to keep companies here, and most importantly, to fill that growth capital gap. So there's a lot more that we can do, particularly around driving institutional investment into the UK ecosystem as well.
Janine, we started this conversation by coming off one of our reporters on the pay gap, and we'll get more on that between men and women in finance. But if you look at your world, I mean, what is it? Tech companies, about 15%, I think the stat is, of women are fintech founders in the UK. But they only get about 9% of the capital, and just 3% of venture capital goes to all-female teams. That narrative needs to change. I mean, I was at a podium last week listening to the former CEO of Citigroup talking about women in the boardroom and the changes that would have happened in the global financial crisis. How do women get access, better access to more capital? What needs to change, Janine? The providers of finance or the narrative from the request?
Well, I think it's actually a mix of everything, because we have to be looking at our ecosystem. We have to be looking at actually the investors themselves, making sure that they have female representation within their decision-making team as well. But we also have to begin at all levels of an organization. So help to provide women with that opportunity to come in at any level of industry, but also start out at a young age as well. We have a Fintech for Schools program, which is about educating younger children about financial services, about fintech, getting them excited, because the journey begins so early on.
Well, you know, when you look at fintech and women starting companies, minorities, black folks starting companies, it's sort of embedded in the DNA. But when you look at maybe beyond the fintech space with finance as a whole and these older institutions, I mean, can change really happen there? Again, if perhaps the DNA of it is this old boys club.
It's a good question. I think what we need to do, it's our responsibility as industry ultimately to try and make these efforts and really shine a light on the great successes. And part of what we're doing also this week at UK Fintech Week and at IFGS 2022 today is to look at those great successes. So put some of the female founders in the spotlight, also the male founders and underrepresented founders, and just particularly for the UK, shine a light on all of our great achievements that we've achieved here in our ecosystem.